In this video we're going to cover what it is to play the Artillerist, aka the moving turret in Lost Ark. It's an advanced class available to gunners that ultimately breaks the stereotype of ranged classes who are usually fast paced and squishy. That's because the Artillerist is heavy, slow and known for being able to do a ton of damage safely from afar. Being packed with heavy guns may cause low mobility, but it also comes with great defences, helping them face tank some high damage mechanics with ease. In addition, every single Artillerist skill has AoE built into it, and many of them can wipe out mob groups in a single go. Some of the harder hitting ones are also used as primary single target damage skills, but if you want to roll out the heavy artillery major DPS skills, you also need to pay attention to your timing as they are delayed and take some seconds to land. The Artillerist gets his tough touch from a shield, just like the Gunlancer's identity, which makes him immune to knockbacks and paralysed states if maxed out. In addition to the extra defense from their class engraving regardless of the level of the engraving, this makes Artillerist so far one of the tankiest classes in the game along with Destroyer. All in all, Artillerists are easy to play because of their lack of mobility and good defences, so you won't need to worry too much about your positioning and can nuke your enemies from a safe distance. So if you're looking for a class that can do lots of damage through huge burst or consistent damage spam whilst being safe, look no further. Comparing the Artillerist to the other gunner classes, it is by far the tankiest and also has the highest stagger, but its mobility does have to pay for it. A similar playstyle to another class is comparing the ranged DPS Artillerist with an Ignition Sorcerer, as their spells also have lots of delays that function as high damage nukes. The Artillerist's identity is one of a kind, as it transforms the Artillerist into a massive turret. This locks you in one spot, which may feel clunky at first, but it also makes you deal huge amounts of damage with the help of turret mode skills that will easily melt down your enemies. Turret mode also makes Artillerist immune to knockbacks and paralysed states, and it has a shield skill that not only lasts for a good amount of seconds, but it also absorbs a third of the Artillerist's HP and damage. It's also good to know that you can use different battle items during your turret mode, such as time stop potions, and if you want to get out of your turret mode whenever you want, you can also use any mobility skill to deactivate it immediately. To access his turret mode, Artillerist, just like most of the other classes, builds up their identity gauge to also get his firepower buff that lets him deal that extra damage. On top of that, with the help of the firepower enhancement class engraving that we'll cover later on in the video, the firepower buff will have extra crit chance depending on the stage of the gauge. Therefore, the higher the gauge stage, the more damage you're going to burst and the more crit you're going to ultimately have. In PvE, the Artillerist will spend most of their time tanking mobs and waiting for the main damage to drop. When it comes to mobs that are more complicated like bosses or guardians, you should hold on to your heavy hitting delayed DPS skills until you figure out the boss mechanics, to basically ensure that you don't miss those big skills. That's why the Artillerist kinda requires you to have a good knowledge of bosses and their mechanics, to make sure you don't waste those abilities. Moving on to PvP, the Artillerist is a great choice to pick as it's easy to coordinate with him. His lack of mobility makes you want to stay in the backline and poke and damage the enemy team from as far away as possible. When it comes to 1v1 fights, Artillerists should wait for the perfect moment to stun their opponent and perform the deadly combo that will drain half the opponent's health in a matter of seconds. The biggest fear of an Artillerist in PvP though is a good CC class, sticking to you and chasing you down, especially those sorcerers. That's why you want to use your shields wisely and coordinate with your team to continue to be effective and make sure you don't get interrupted whilst casting those skills. Let's take a look at some of the Artillerist's core abilities now. Air Raid is one of your main DPS combo skills that launches a shell into the air which drops at a target location. This deals damage and knocks up enemies into the air that are caught inside it. The time needed for this skill to land though is 3 seconds. Homing Barrage is your core DPS skill that makes the Artillerist set a mine at close range point to then have a nuclear missile drop onto that mine, dealing some pretty insane damage and decent destruction. The time needed to land this skill is 4 seconds. Flamethrower, as the name suggests, makes the Artillerist hold his cannon and start flaming his opponent with decent damage over time. It's also used to fill up your identity gauge, but note that once it's cast you cannot change the skill's direction. However, you will still be able to move freely. Multiple Rocket Launcher releases 5 missiles that deal damage to random targets. This skill is also a very good stagger skill which deals damage over time with the Flame Rocket tripod taken. Summoned Turrets makes the artillery install a nearby turret that starts auto-attacking and helps you dish out some decent damage over a good amount of time. As with all classes, the Artillerist has access to 2 awakening abilities. Heavy Turret, funnily enough, drops a big turret that auto-attacks nearby enemies and starts lasering them down. You can also change the target of it manually by pressing shift on your keyboard whilst holding your right click on your target. There's also one extra massive laser attack that can be triggered after installing the turret by pressing your awakening button a second time. You really want to make sure you don't forget about that one. The Missile Barrage Awakening is fairly straightforward, as it only makes your Artillerist launch a whole bunch of missiles that deal tons of damage onto your enemies at your cursor's location. This skill can also be pretty handy when used in Chaos Dungeons. Every Lost Ark class has access to engravings that will focus your playstyle in one particular direction. For Artillerists, the class engraving selection is a bit different though, as you'll always have the firepower enhancement engraving. That being said, you'll mainly choose your engraving depending on the build that you like, so you'll either choose between a high swiftness or high specialization build, both of which have incredibly different playstyles. Let's start with the more important firepower enhancement engraving. This class engraving must be used regardless of whichever playstyle you're on, since it enhances your crit chance and gives you extra defenses which you simply cannot miss out on. As the name already explains, firepower enhancement increases everything related to your firepower identity. That means you'll have increased normal firepower damage as well as increased crit chance along with 20% increased defenses. This can also be really useful at all stages of the game, as you can already slot in other strong engravings like Grudge with no downsides, even at level 1. When you choose this high swiftness build, you obviously want to prioritise swiftness first, and then crit, as you won't be focusing on your turret as much. If you really do enjoy playing around the Artillerist identity though, aka turning into a living turret, then Barrage Enhancement is for you. It will enhance the damage of your extra turret skills by a significant amount. Also, if the Artillerist isn't affected by the firepower buff, this engraving grants you a good amount of firepower meter instantly, and it removes the cooldown effect of that firepower buff. If you decide to take this class engraving as well, you need to change your playstyle by focusing on high specialization points to enhance everything regarding turret mode, and make sure you get the most amount of extra damage from that Barrage Enhancement engraving. That should be everything that you need to know to get your journey started on Lost Ark. Don't forget to head on over to our website at mobalytics.gg to find out all sorts of other content, including class guides, boss breakdowns and plenty more.